Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio, where this week I'm embarking on a whole new project. As a matter of fact, it's a whole new model railroad and a whole new scale that I haven't featured on the channel before. A couple of months ago, I did a workbench video on a little slice of Colorado narrow gauge in HOn3 that I'm calling Barlow Pass. And that's exactly what we're going to be starting on this week. The basic theme is that this is a forgotten branch line of the Denver and Rio Grande Western operating somewhere in southwestern Colorado in the 1930s. This gives me the opportunity to do a little bit of proto-freelancing, to use the equipment and operating characteristics of the real-world narrow gauge Denver and Rio Grande Western and reimagine them in a fictional location somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. I have always been fascinated with Colorado narrow gauge railroads, and I chose this particular railroad and this era to model based on a collection of Blackstone HOn3 equipment that was provided for this project by a very good friend of the channel. These Blackstone K27 and C19 locomotives are beautifully detailed models and incredibly fine runners with DCC and sound on board, and they deserve an equally well-detailed and beautiful model railroad to run on. So let's head back into the train room now and take a look at where this thing's going to go. My original plan for the Barlow Pass layout was to build it over here in front of these roll-up doors. The whole thing would be on rollers so I could move it out of the way and access the door when necessary. But turns out I use this door a little bit more often than I originally anticipated, so I don't want to block it. And since that original plan, I've come up with a better idea. And the new plan is to put the layout over here along this wall, opposite the Thunder Mesa and the Goldfield and Calico layouts. This gives me a roughly 4 by 8 foot space, just about the right size for what I have in mind. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff here that needs to move before I can start installing bench work and laying track. And before I start moving or building anything, I need to revise the current plan to fit this specific space. I like the original plan I drew quite a bit, though it was for a somewhat longer and narrower space than I have to work with now. So I want to take all of the elements that I like from that previous plan and put it into a new plan that'll fit this particular space. There's also something else I want to change. The original plan had a continuous run. It was basically a loop with a branch line up to the town of Barlow Pass. I'm going to change that this time. I want more of a point to reverse loop design. So it'll open up a little bit more in the operations area and be something different from the usual caboose chasers that I build here on this channel. If there is a question I am asked more than just about any other, it's, how do you draw your track plans? What software do you use? That kind of thing. I've talked about that at length here on the channel before, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of review at the top of this video to show you what my process is like. And for me, everything starts with pencil and paper. Now, I prefer to use a blue line grid paper like this. It makes your drawings much more precise. And you can pick this stuff up at just about any good art supply store or office supply store. You can find it online as well. And I like to use a grid of what's called an 8 by 8 grid. So each one of these 1-inch squares is divided up into 1/8 inch squares going horizontally and vertically. And that makes it very easy to draw at scale, where you've got a scale of 1/8 of an inch equals 1 inch. So each one of these little 1/8 inch squares equals 1 square inch in your drawing. When I do these plans, I draw them out very lightly first with a hard lead pencil, and then I go back with a softer lead pencil. I really like these blue Prismacolor color erase pencils. So draw them in lightly first. I always start with the curves and then go to the turnouts, because the curves, especially the big turnback curves, those are going to take up the most room on your plan. And if you draw those in first, they're going to let you know right away what you have room for on the rest of the plan. Then I go back and I detail the path of the track a little bit. I indicate ties, but I also try to indicate the roadbed on each side. And the reason I do that is so that I know, have a good idea how much space that's actually going to take up in the real world. And finally, once I'm happy with the whole plan, I go back and draw in all of the structures and things like that, just to round it out and strengthen up lines here and there, because I'm going to take this whole thing and then I'm going to scan it into the computer. So I want good sharp lines and good values, good darks and lights, so it'll scan well. I use a bed scanner on my printer to import the drawing into a graphics program like Adobe Photoshop, or in this case, I'm using Affinity Photo 2, which I like a little bit better than Adobe Photoshop. And then I go in, and the first thing I'm going to do is scale the drawing, make sure I'm not distorting it in any way, and having it be at scale in the computer. So I scan it in at 300 DPI, and then I put in the rulers on the page so that I know that 1 inch on my drawing is going to equal 1 inch on the screen. That way, if I want to print this plan out, I can print it out at scale, and I'm not going to lose anything there. It's going to be the same scale as my original drawing. So I take time to clean everything up and make sure all the lines are as crisp and readable as I can make them. And then I just go back and, color it in like a page from a coloring book, using the tools in the photo editing software. And I could go into all of that, but that would become a tutorial on how to use Affinity Photo or Photoshop, and that's really kind of beyond the scope of this discussion today, beyond the scope of what we're going to build today. So suffice to say, I go back and color the whole thing in, and I probably, again, do more than a lot of people do, because my background is in illustration and graphic design, so it just kind of comes natural to me to make it a pretty drawing and go that extra mile. But once everything is colored in and shaded, then I'll go back again and put in all the graphics, the names of towns and junctions and certain structures that I want to point out. And in this case, since this plan has a 3% grade, I want to put in the changes in elevation where they occur at each point on the plan. And I made a note of that in the original drawing when I was drawing. And with that, our plan is pretty much done. And now we can take a good close look at it and see just what it has to offer. That clip was an eastbound train headed for Cumbres Pass on the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad as it snakes its way along the Colorado-New Mexico border. The Cumbres and Toltec is one of the best preserved segments of the old Denver and Rio Grande narrow gauge system, and it's been a huge inspiration for this project. But the Barlow Pass has its own fictional backstory. Starting out in the mid-1870s as the highly speculative Colorado and Union Railroad, with grand plans to cross the Rockies and eventually go all the way to the Pacific. Well, as was often the case, that didn't quite work out, and the whole thing ended up in receivership, eventually to be taken over lock, stock, and locomotive by the mighty Rio Grande. In the time frame that I'm modeling, the Rio Grande has been operating the line for more than 30 years, and things are starting to get a little bit run down. It is the Great Depression after all, and revenues are scarce. Most of the mines around the headwaters of Fickle Creek are starting to play out, and the only things really keeping the line afloat at this point are the U.S. mail contract and the shipping needs of the local farms and ranches. It's fall, and that means stock season in the Rockies, so cattle and sheep trains will be a big part of the operations on Barlow Pass. Now let's zoom in on the plan and take an imaginary ride on the line to see how things will operate. Starting down in the lower right corner, our train enters the layout from a future staging area, crosses below a trestle, and then begins a slow climb up the 3% grade to Elk Park Junction. Like many mountain railroads, this branch line follows the natural courses of rivers and streams to get where it's going. With Fickle Creek on our left, we skirt the edges of Elk Park, a locale that lives up to its name with abundant wild game and big fat trout in the stream. Reaching Elk Park Junction, we continue straight, crossing a low trestle before entering Flat Top Tunnel. We descend slightly, and on the far side of the tunnel emerge suddenly onto spectacular Lonesome Gorge, crossing the Great Chasm on a tall steel trestle a good 100 feet above the stream below. The curved trestle takes us on into the darkness of Long Tunnel, where we eventually begin to climb again before exiting over a Howe Truss Bridge and passing below the fabled Fickle Lady Mine, now only producing a fraction of the silver ore extracted from her depths in the old days. Completing the reverse loop, we pass through Elk Park Junction again, this time in the opposite direction, before continuing the climb up to the pass. The track follows a rocky shelf blasted right out of the cliffside as it climbs high above Elk Park. Like so many narrow gauge lines, this route uses a looping course over the same area to gain elevation in a way that our little trains can handle. Crossing the same trestle we passed below at the start of our journey, we reach the outskirts of Barlow, Colorado. There's big doings in the stockyards to our left as the cowboys prepare to load their cattle into a string of waiting stock cars. The cows have been getting fat on high country grass all summer long, and now it's time to ship them off to market. Our train continues on to the depot, a cream and brown colored structure with fancy trim and a steeply sloped roof that tells of deep winter snows in this remote corner of the Rockies. Our train lurches to a stop. Up ahead is the end of the line. Once there had been grand plans to continue the tracks through the treacherous pass beyond Fort Barlow, but the route proved too expensive and difficult, and all hopes of building a railroad that crossed the Continental Divide here were abandoned after the silver crash of 1893. Beyond the depot, there's a small engine terminal with a 65-foot turntable and a brick engine house. The coaling and sand facilities bear a striking resemblance to those found in Chama, New Mexico. Finally, the town itself rises on the slopes above the train yard, with the steep, windy streets so often found in old mining towns. There's a small commercial district with hotels, stores, honky-tonks, and the usual businesses one finds in places like this. Most appear to be struggling just to get by. Houses and cabins dot the west end of town. The mountains beyond rise toward the sky, with snow still left in the shady spots from the storms of last winter. So in this out and back design, I could run trains from Barlow down through Elk Park and then return via the reverse loop, or go point to point from the staging yard to town and vice versa. Now, there's no allowance for a continuous run, but that's okay. Most real railroads don't go in circles either. This layout is being built to operate, and all in all, I'm pretty excited about both the modeling and operational possibilities that this plan has to offer. Okay, that's enough planning, backstory, and daydreaming. Let's get building. Okay, well, I've spent most of the morning cleaning out this corner where the layout's going to go. And in particular, these shop shelves. Because my plan is to integrate these shelves into the stand itself. They're going to be actually holding the layout up. Now, I've used shop shelves to hold up parts of model railroads before, but this time it's going to be different because this whole thing's going to be on wheels. And I'm going to tie everything together with lumber. So it's going to be a combination of these shop shelves and some lumber pieces, kind of a Frankenstein project. So the next thing I need to do is break these down and load them into the van and take them home to my home workshop where I've got my woodworking tools so I can build this whole thing. Before I do that, though, I want to give you the measurements of these. These are pretty standard shop shelves that you can get. You know, they come in a big flat box and you put them together. You can get them at Home Depot or any place like that. And these are about 18 inches deep. Each one is about 35.5 inches wide and about 35.5 inches tall. So once I get them up on the wheels and everything, should be just about the right height for building the benchwork, and then I'll have room below for scenery like Lonesome Gorge and things like that that are down below track level. Let me show you on these kinds of shelves. They basically just have this button and keyhole slot design, so that just fits down in there like that. So basically it's just gravity that's holding the whole thing together. But that's okay, because whatever else happens in the world, I don't expect gravity to fail anytime soon. Well, here in my garage, I've reassembled the shelves, and I've also managed to procure some semi-okay dimensional lumber. This is some select pine, they call it, from my local home center, or as I like to call them, the Walmart of wood. And I've got some 1x3s and some 1x4s that we're going to use. Now on the shelves here, you'll notice that I put the top shelf down about halfway, and that's going to make it much more usable within the configuration I have in mind here. The shelves are going to sit on what's basically a dolly made of 1x4 L girders like this, and they're also going to be bolted to it. And then I'm going to have another pair of L girders up here at the top, tying the top end together, and that's what the actual layout box girder benchwork will sit on top of. So to get started on this, just going to use my chop saw to cut the 1x4 pieces for those bottom L girders. And I'm going to need 4 of these, which are each 72 inches long. Now assembling these into L girders is extremely simple. Probably the easiest thing you ever want to build. First I'm going to put a bead of yellow glue on the top of this piece. And we'll put this one up on top. I'm going to use a block of 1x4. Hold that in the right position. Then I want to go and put a screw in about every 9 inches or so. And I always drill pilot holes. Depending on the quality of the wood you're dealing with, you may or may not have to do that, but I found that it's pretty much always a good idea. Using some 1 1/4 inch interior wood screws for this. I'll just clean up this excess glue and build another one just like it. I've clamped the shelves together and slid my L girders underneath the legs, because now I need to measure and cut the end pieces, one for each side, that will tie the whole thing together. So I need a couple pieces that are about 19 1/4. I've got those pieces installed, and I added a third cross piece in the middle just for some extra strength for good measure. I installed them on the bottom rather than on the ends, because going into the end grain here would be a pretty weak joint. This is a much stronger connection to do it this way. And now I can flip this whole thing over we can install the casters. I've got some of these big, beautiful 4-inch swiveling casters. These are fairly heavy duty, and I wanted them that way because this is going to be supporting some weight. Just take my pencil and mark the holes for these. Now each of these gets installed with some 3/4 inch construction screws and a washer. The washer is just because these holes are ginormous. All right, that's not going anywhere. Now I can flip this back over and we can attach the shelves. Whoa. There we go. Now some of you might be wondering why I didn't put the base on first, then turn it over and put the wheels on. Well, as I mentioned earlier, these kind of shop shelves are basically just held together by gravity. So if I turned it upside down, there's a good chance the whole thing would fall apart while I was trying to put the casters on. So even though I had to, wrangle it a little bit, I think this was the better way to do it. It worked. Now, using these keyhole slots as a guide, I'm drilling straight through, right through the 1x4, because I'm going to pass some 1/4 inch bolts through those, and that's how we're going to connect this whole thing to the wooden frame. So each of these connections gets a 1.5 inch long 1/4 inch bolt, a couple of washers, and an appropriately sized nut. So one washer on the outside, one on the inside, and then a nut. And that's going to hold all of this very, very securely. Okay, that ought to do it. And lastly, added this cross piece up here at the top for some added strength and stability. Okay, I think that'll work quite nicely. Now I just need to build a couple more L girders that will bolt up here to the tops of the frame, and those are going to be made just like I did the ones for the bottom, except this time I'm going to use 1x3s, so they're going to be a little bit lighter weight. So again, this is pretty straightforward. Just connecting one 1x3 to the other in an L-shaped configuration, thus the name L girder. Using some 1¼ inch construction screws, and they will support the box girder frame that I'm going to be building for the layout. Nice thing about building L girders is if your wood is less than perfectly straight, if it's warped a little bit in one direction or another, as often happens with the wood we get from our local home centers, the L girders, they put pressure against each other and they help to straighten each other out. So you end up with a a finished piece which is straighter than the sum of its parts. Now I need to drill these to receive the 1/4-inch bolts that will attach the L-girders to the frame. Now I'm just adding a 1x3 end piece to both sides, just to give everything a nice finished look. Well, this turned out even better than I thought it would, which is pretty rare. Now I just need to take it to the studio and roll it into place. Well, all right, that is the first major project of the Barlow Pass HOn3 layout done. I've got a sturdy stand that I can roll around, roll out of the way if I need to, and just want to let you know the layout itself is going to have a larger footprint than this. It's actually going to overhang the stand on all 4 sides by about 10 inches or so. And now that this thing is finished, let me give you the final dimensions of it. It's about 74 inches long, 23 inches deep, and 40 1/2 inches high. And I'm going to need to roll this out from the wall in the not too distant future because I have a backdrop plan that's going to go along this back wall here and partially on this side. So, look forward to that in a future episode. In the meantime, some of you might be wondering why I went to the trouble of building all this with the shop shelves, as part of it. I could have easily built the whole thing out of wood. Yes, that's true. There's a couple of reasons. One, these are aluminum, so they're very lightweight. Another reason is I had them. I had them on hand, and I like to reuse and recycle and upcycle stuff I already have lying around. But probably the most important reason is that when I was looking to put the layout over here, the shop shelves were going to be in the way, and I didn't have another place in the studio to put them. So my solution was just to build them right into the stand. But I know this doesn't look much like a model railroad yet. This is just step 1 in a long journey, and I hope you will come along with me on the ride. I hope you're subscribed with those notifications turned on so YouTube will let you know when the next video is coming from Thunder Mesa Studio. Next time out, we'll be building the box frame and probably the plywood sub-road bed, and it'll really start to look more like a model railroad then. Before we wrap things up for today, I just want to send a shout out to Empire Trackworks, who are graciously providing the custom-built HOn3 turnouts that I'll be using on the layout here. They also make turnouts in O scale, ON30, HO, N scale, S scale, all kinds of custom stuff. Please check out their website. That's empire-trackworks.com, and I'll put a link in the video description down below. But that's going to do it for today. I want to thank you all so much for watching today. Remember, you can also follow Thunder Mesa for free on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Thunder Mesa, or on Instagram at thunder.mesa. And check out the resources available on the Thunder Mesa Studio website at thundermesa.studio. As always, a huge thank you to our Patreon members who help to make these videos possible. Until next time, keep moving forward, everybody, and adios for now.